We are the higher self of the One, known to this instrument in a language sequence terms as Mildred Rivera, who started its incarnation cycle on 1971, and we are now here to share with you our thoughts and insights pertaining to the queries as placed by this instrument. And before we start to share with you our thoughts and insights, we, as the higher self of this entity known as Mildred Rivera, are now approaching and communicating, as sought by this instrument's vibration, the lessons and the information required to understand the soul evolutionary cycle of this entity known as Mildred Rivera, who started its first density experience not on this Earth planet but on a different galactic system. Hence, before we share this information, you must remember to exercise your free will and discernment when listening to our messages, thereby understanding the potential of navigating yourself throughout the infinite consciousness, and also recognizing the inner value that you have of the true nature of the self. For the inner value of the true nature of the self enters into a higher vibration of conscious reality. This follows and allows for a type of navigation system, allowing for a deeper activation of the self, and the experiences of each entity begins to progress further and further throughout the densities of understanding the reality which many of you may experience to be true. Furthermore, we are now going to share with you one timeline of the soul evolutionary cycle of this entity, who started its first density experiences after originating from the Andromeda B planetary sphere in the Andromeda galaxy, which allowed this entity to further progress and learn the lessons in the form of a Andromedan first density water element. This allowed this entity to then further progress by understanding the lessons in the form of a stone element. Upon reaching into the later vibrations of the first density reality, this followed and allowed this entity to then graduate and enter into the beginning stages of the second density reality, and was given the soul name of Ixas, which means the breath of life. This entity, in that incarnation in the same planet of its origin, started to learn the lessons of the second density in the form of a plant life form, and began to polarize itself towards the understanding of the lessons of unity, and also the lessons of awareness and beingness, as this is the ability that each entity has to learn the lessons of awareness and beingness. On the level of the second density, it then began to spend the incarnation specifically gaining a experience of awareness and beingness, thereby polarizing itself more towards the infinite consciousness. After this entity reached into the later vibrations of this reality, it was then able to experience a deeper awakening consciousness. This followed and allowed this entity the internal aspects of recognizing its true potential. However, because of the lack of self-awareness on this level, it was then transported to the planetary sphere in the Arcturus star system in order to learn the lessons of the later second density vibration in the form of a animal life form. Upon reaching the later vibrations in the form of a animal life form, it began to polarize and navigate, thereby learning the lessons of the second density consciousness in the form of a hierarchical system of interaction, following which this entity then graduated into the third density reality, wherein it spent the lessons of learning to interact in a third density hierarchical system of consciousness, allowing this entity the experience of choosing the path of polarity on the level of the third density reality, as this entity chose the path of service to others on this level of experience. This then led this entity to experience a catalytic environment, specifically the catalytic environment of the self and the catalytic environment of the outside self, which allowed this entity to navigate further and further inside the continuum of existence or the cyclical loop of understanding the true nature of self awareness. As it began to obtain the lessons of self awareness on this level of third density, in the form of a third density mind, body, and spirit complex, it was then transported to the Earth's planetary sphere, and the first incarnation of this entity started on the timeline of 1677. On that incarnation cycle, it began to learn the lessons in the form of a woman body complex known by the name of Margaret. This allowed this entity to then further polarize itself towards the infinite consciousness and learning the lessons of interaction with other entities, thereby following which this entity then polarized itself more towards the experience of the self. After this entity learned many of the lessons on this level of understanding, this entity then began to recognize that it has to learn the lessons of balancing of its red ray energy center of the sexual aspect and the survival aspect. However, in that incarnation, it was unable to balance this aspect, which led to the creation of a certain physical imbalance and disease. This entity then ended the incarnation at the age of 58 years in that timeline, leading it to then reincarnate in the next incarnation on the timeline of 1912. In that incarnation, it was known by the name of Sugmit, in the form of a man body complex. In that incarnation, it began to learn the lessons of the balance between service to self and service to others, because without the balancing between service to self and service to others, there would be no ability of polarizing. As this entity had incarnated into a wealthy family because of its positive past karma collective, it then reincarnated in the next incarnation cycle on the next timeline of 1971. In this incarnation now, it has the final choice to choose the path of polarity, and we can already sense that this entity has many a times accessed the energies of the fourth density. However, because of its inability to stay in the vibrations of the fourth density, it still has returned back to the third density reality of the egoic self many a times. For the letting go of the egoic aspect is required in order to fully enter into the fourth density vibration. Hence we leave you in love light of the one Creator. Go forth and rejoice in the power and in the peace of the one Creator. Bye.